Hello, and welcome to the Libertarian Show. Today I want to make a video about a phenomenon that I've been noticing. There's a bit of a dichotomy or a disconnect between, are you surprised to hear this? Between social media and the real world, specifically in relation to whether or not socialism is spreading. Socialism is absolutely spreading on social media, especially in the Western first world English speaking internet social media kind of world. But we're not seeing that spread happening in the real world, not globally, not even in the first world, not economically. You know what I mean? It's a phenomenon that seems to only be happening contained within social media and websites and Discord chat and, little internet social groups. One of the reasons I started this channel and started making videos is because I myself noticed and became kind of alarmed, frankly, that socialism and communism are spreading so much in popularity on the internet. I spend a lot of time on the internet, spend a lot of time on social media. I've made a lot of friends around the world on the internet, and as a red-blooded capitalist, I wanted to stand up to that spread, that spread in popularity that socialism is experiencing, and I wanted to push back against it. I see it on Reddit, I see it on Twitter, I see it on Facebook, I see it on, to a lesser extent, YouTube, but yeah, even on YouTube. But the question is that I started asking myself recently is, are we seeing a similar push, a similar increase in popularity of socialism in the real world in terms of governmental economic policy, in terms of the modes of production? And I'm coming to the conclusion that no, we're not seeing a push of socialism in the real world that is matching what we're seeing happening on the internet. Definitely don't think it's happening. In a global sense, in the past few decades especially, socialism has been losing ground in the real world. It's been losing ground in the global economy. Only in a few pockets here and there has socialism gained any ground. Like from 2000 to 2013, socialism, 2000 to 2017, socialism was gaining ground in Venezuela. Socialism has been holding tight in Cuba, but it's been receding pretty much everywhere else. And even recently, in the past few years, it's been even receding in Venezuela and Cuba just a little bit. I'm going to get into that in a little more detail. On the whole, planet Earth has been seeing a profound erosion of socialist policies and a big expansion of capitalism, free markets, and private property rights, and basically economic liberalization in the 21st century, in this century. Let me start off showing you a graph. This is from the Index of Economic Freedom. This is a sampling of countries in various continents. We've got Peru, Norway, Denmark, Taiwan, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand. So most continents are represented on this graph. And what you're looking at here is the blue lines show the economic freedom scores from 1950, and the red lines show the economic freedom scores from 2016. Now, the higher the number, the more economically free that location is, that country is. So as you can see, economic freedom has been going up in all these countries that are just sampled, basically, on these many different continents. Now, while the economic freedom scores have been going up, and this means more economic liberalization, more free markets, more private property rights, more profits, more free trade, more competition, less red tape, less protectionism, less tariffs. Okay, that's what these scores represent. While that's been happening, poverty has been going down. The number of people in poverty has been going down, and the number of people that are wealthy has been going up. All right, let me show you a graph. You see here, this is the total population. The graph starts in 1950 and ends in 2015, and as the population grows, the percentage, the absolute numbers, and the ratio as well of people living in extreme poverty has been going down. The people not living in extreme poverty has been going up. What this means is that you are more likely today to be rich or middle class than be poor. compared to even just a few decades ago. I mean, look at 1990 versus 2010. Now, it was recently pointed out to me that the country of communist China is responsible for much of the reduction in poverty and increase in wealth in the past few decades. This was pointed out to me by an internet socialist, and he was using it as an argument like, this is a refutation of capitalism and a defense of communism because communist China is responsible for a majority of the reduction in poverty that we've seen recently. Now, he's right on the first half, but he was wrong on the second half. Okay, so China is by far the world's most populous nation. So by sheer size alone, it makes sense that if China were to reduce poverty, and it has, then the reduction in poverty that China contributes to the global reduction in poverty would dwarf similar reductions in poverty in any other country. So let's say that China reduces poverty by, 80% or whatever. And then let's say that Argentina were to also reduce poverty by 80%. Well, the fact that China has 100 times the population of Argentina or something like that, it makes sense that China's contribution to the reduction in poverty on that global graph would be much more significant than, Argentina or any other single country. So just by sheer size alone, yes, when China's poverty goes up, it's responsible for a huge proportion of the increase in poverty globally. And when China's poverty goes down, it's also going to be responsible for a huge proportion of the reduction in poverty globally. But China is not the only country that is seeing a reduction in poverty. Just the fact that it has the most people means that it's going to contribute the most to that number when it happens. But the question remains, what is responsible for China's reduction in poverty? Is it communist policies and planned economics? Or is it market liberalization, economic freedom, capitalism, private property rights, competition, the fluctuating price mechanism, that kind of thing? Certainly, I'll tell you, it's certainly not the case that communism or planned economics can take credit for China's reduction in poverty. No, it was competition, it was free markets, it was private property rights, liberalization that were responsible for China's poverty reduction. Why? Because China's poverty reduction only began in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s is when it started happening. And why did it start happening then? I'll tell you why. Because Chairman Mao was in control of the Chinese economy, and he was pushing a very collectivist, planned economic policy throughout his entire life, and he died in the 70s, and shortly after he died, the Gang of Four was rounded up and thrown in prison. They were like the leaders in China, loyal to Mao's ideology. They were removed from power, and the next generation of communist leaders in China decided to loosen their restrictions on private property rights in the Chinese economy. They started allowing more profits. They lowered the amount of red tape. They allowed more competition. They allowed, buying and selling on open markets, and they allowed more private property rights. And they even opened a stock market. These steps were responsible for the reduction in poverty that China has experienced, because that reduction in poverty only began after those economic reforms were implemented, after the country was pulled back from communism and given more capitalism, did prosperity blossom in that country. Only then did they manage to knock down their poverty rate to lower than it's ever been, Now, this phenomenon is not unique to China. Let me give you another example. Also from Asia, much smaller communist-run country named Vietnam. Maybe you heard of it. They have a similar story. Shortly after winning the war against the United States and kicking out the American military, Vietnam began a collectivization process. Of course, because it was the communists that won. They reunited Vietnam and they started implementing communist economic policies. Okay, they anticipated, finally, now that the Americans are gone, we can prosper with our communist policies. Nope. What happened was, the country was already poor. They were expecting to become less poor, so they started collectivizing their farms and stuff. And Vietnam was very agrarian, very farm-oriented back then, and it still is a lot to this day. So they implemented a farm collectivization process. All the farms were collectivized by the state. They were given production quotas with mandates to sell rice. They mostly grow rice there. They had mandates to grow rice and sell it to the government at predetermined fixed prices. No market mechanism, no competition, no private ownership of farms. No profiteering was allowed. That was the communist economic plan. It didn't work very well, short to say. Everyone was hungry. Everyone kept being hungry. Rice production flatlined and even started to wither. People started getting real pissed off at their leaders. But fortunately and wisely, the Communist Party in Vietnam decided to, they looked at the evidence, they looked at the figures, and they decided to relax their economic planning controls. They liberalized their food industry. They allowed farms to become privately owned and allowed rice to be sold on an open market with a proper price mechanism. They spread these liberalization reforms across the whole Vietnamese economy eventually. The result is that by the early 1980s, rice production was going up and fast, really fast. Today, Vietnam is no longer hungry. They're very well fed. They produce plenty of food for themselves, and they produce enough extra rice to have become the world's top rice exporter. So poverty in Vietnam plummeted, prosperity skyrocketed, and now they have a similar economic success story just like China does, thanks to liberalization of their economy and a newfound, if reluctant, respect for private property rights. Now the Vietnamese people love capitalism despite having a communist party in charge of the government. Look at this. Look at this headline. It turns out communist Vietnam loves capitalism more than the US does. And it's true, they do. Even countries like Venezuela and Cuba are slowly starting to come around. Just in the last 4 years, the last few years, they've started to relax a little bit their economic red tape and controls. About 20 years ago, Venezuela undertook a hardcore anti-capitalist collectivization effort. They banned private property for most economic sectors. They banned most forms of profit. They implemented artificial price controls. They kicked out foreign companies. They banned the use of foreign currencies. They seized the means of production. They seized factories and businesses and handed them over to the workers. Their economy quickly collapsed. Fast forward to today. They are the poorest, most poverty-stricken nation in Latin America, and so far, 10% of their population, that's 5 million people, well, almost 10%, it's like 8%, okay, so 8% of their population, 5 million people have fled the country. They've mostly gone to Colombia, but they've also gone to Peru and Brazil and Argentina and Mexico, and even some have come to America. Their government, just in the last year or two, has finally started to walk back just a little bit of their socialist economic policies. But the writing's on the wall, you know. Once again, they allowed foreign currency to be used in the economy. The dollar is no longer banned. They're walking back some of their price controls, not completely, but a little bit. They're also trying to woo back to entice foreign companies to come back to the country. And they're even allowing some companies to go back to private ownership, some of the domestic companies. Check out this headline from Bloomberg. Bankrupted by socialism, Venezuela cedes control of companies. So this is all very recent, but I'm hoping that Venezuela continues on this path and starts to undo some of their economic damage and reap the rewards of economic liberalization and giving economic freedom to their people and experiencing the prosperity that they deserve and the reduction in poverty that they need. So they still have a long way to go. We'll see what happens, but we're starting to see some good signs in Venezuela. Now, Cuba is doing something similar. Now that Raul Castro has retired, the government of Cuba is relaxing some of their anti-capitalist policies. They've opened up a number of professions to private enterprise. Check out this headline. Cuba legalizes small and medium private businesses. They have these are professions that and businesses that were previously forbidden to be privately owned or run. They all had to be run collectively and by the state. They've begun allowing the buying and selling of residential properties on an open market. Now, this was something that was banned shortly after Fidel Castro first took power. So this has been banned for like 60 plus years. They are removing some of their longstanding bans on foreign-owned businesses from operating on the island. Not completely, but a little bit. They even recently opened up, this is funny, they've opened up a bunch of stores that are selling highly desired products, and they only accept US dollars or euros as a form of payment. Now, they're selling products that people in Cuba desperately need, but those are products that you cannot buy in the regular Cuban stores, not the stores that take the Cuban peso. These products are only available in the stores that take the foreign dollars and euros. That's how badly they want foreign currency now, and that's basically a concession to the superiority of capitalism and free trade. They can't do with a planned economic model what the open market can do. Now, this is quite a shocking move. It actually caused a lot of shock and disappointment in the people because they've been fed this anti-imperialist dogma for so long, and now all of a sudden the government's saying, "Hey, look, why don't you go get yourself some U.S. dollars, and we'll sell you stuff that you can't buy with your communist pesos." Talk about a reversal. Talk about a slap in the face, huh? Talk about a fucking fail. But I'm glad to see it happen, and really the truth is that it's gonna help them economically and help them with prosperity in the long run. Cuba still has a long way to go, just like Venezuela does, but in both cases, they are halting their plans on building socialism, and they're slowly liberalizing various economic sectors and implementing market reforms. Maybe they're learning lessons from China's economic miracle. I hope so, and I hope they pick up the pace. The last example I want to give is the continent of Africa. Truly, I'm telling you, this pro-capitalism push in the real world is a global phenomenon. It's happening on every continent, including Africa. Now, a lot of internet socialists claim that capitalism destroyed Africa. There's an element of truth in that claim, but overall, it is false. It's not specific enough. What did destroy Africa back in the 20th century, last century, was colonialism and imperialism from admittedly capitalist countries. Now, these colonizers and imperialists, they didn't march into Africa and implement market reforms and private property rights. No, what they did was they colonized Africa. They forced it to give the colonizers free or reduced cost resources and treasure. They implemented a very punitive economic plan. They withheld markets and competition and private property rights from Africa. That's what they did. They subjugated Africans. They subjugated the African countries. Okay, so the subjugation happened by pro-capitalist governments, but it wasn't the economic model of capitalism that destroyed Africa. It was economic planning that destroyed Africa. Okay, what you had were colonizers from capitalist countries implementing their own version of economic planning onto the African continent, and protectionism and red tape and prohibitions and price fixing and all of those other things, and that's what damaged Africa. The good news is that the African countries kicked out all those imperialists and they decolonized the continent. Good. That's what they deserve. The bad news is that these African countries, they perceived capitalism as an economic system to be at fault because the colonizers practiced capitalism back home. I mean, you can see how they might, make that conflation, how they might make that association, but it was an unfortunate mistake because what happened was the decolonization of Africa in the 20th century coincided with a socialist collectivization of their economies. A lot of protectionism, a lot of pro-socialism, planned economic, leaders took power in the various African countries and implemented their own economic models in Africa, these quasi-socialist models. The African continent gets by far the lowest rankings on the index of economic freedom, which means their economies are the least free. Now look, here is the index of economic freedom on a color chart. Green means more capitalist, red means more socialist. The dark maroon means, very economically unfree. And you can see how Africa as a continent is pretty much, universally economically unfree and very anti-capitalist, very hostile to property rights, very hostile to free trade, a lot of protectionism, a lot of tariffs. However, even Africa has recently begun economic liberalization. As of 2021, a new free trade agreement has taken effect between almost every African country. It's called the African Continental Free Trade Area, and it came into effect just this year, just in 2021, and it has an explicit goal of removing red tape, ending tariffs, and opening up the continent's economy to free trade and market-based pricing. Let me quote an article from allafrica.com. Here we go. It says, opening up a market of over 1.3 billion people is expected to spur more intra-African trade while increasing the appeal of direct investment in Africa for the rest of the world. Intra-Africa trade has historically been low. In 2019, only 12% of Africa's $560 billion worth of imports came from within the continent. African countries have also been trapped in the lower levels of the global economy by selling low-value raw materials and buying higher-value manufactured goods. This is seen as one of Africa's major challenges for development. The free trade agreement seeks to reverse this. I think it's a pretty well-crafted agreement. I think it's going to go far in solving those issues that are plaguing the African continent's economy. I expect the free trade agreement to reduce poverty and increase prosperity, just as economic liberalization has done everywhere else it's been implemented. The more Africa opens up economically, the more its people will benefit. It happened in China, it happened in Vietnam, it's going to happen in Africa. So I just gave examples all across the globe in the past 20 years of capitalism and free markets being adopted as official policy from Latin America to Asia and to Africa. And even in places where liberalization was already policy, like North America and Western Europe, we have seen it only intensify. Remember that first slide I showed you with the economic scores? Like, the countries in North America and Western Europe were already relatively economically free in the 1950s, but they're even more so today. So their capitalism has intensified, and so has their prosperity. However, we are not seeing very many real-world countries moving towards socialism, towards protectionism, or towards collectivism. No, that's only happening on the internet, on social media, and in the minds of rich, sheltered, Starbucks-drinking socialists who spend not enough time swinging hammers or learning to code and spend too much time watching Richard Wolff videos and taking bullshit theories like Marxism-Leninism a little too seriously. So while it's true that socialism is spreading on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit, it's not spreading in e-commerce, it's not spreading in the manufacturing industry, it is not spreading in the farming industry or even in the service industry. It is not spreading anymore in Asia. The pink tide in Latin America is receding, and even Africa is moving towards capitalism. Socialism is its own worst enemy. The imperialist U.S. military wasn't able to stop socialism from spreading, but it turns out that it didn't have to. Socialism is self-defeating. Socialism shoots itself in the foot, and capitalism fills the void when socialism inevitably recedes. I won't be surprised if these Twitter socialist LARPers try to start their own collectivist communities. I hope they do, and I wish them the best of luck. I'd be amazed and impressed if they manage to make socialism work economically, but I bet my money that it'll fail. Looking at the track record of socialism, I'd be a fool not to bet my money against it. When you mandate liability ownership of the means of production by the workers and you ban profit, you have a recipe for failure. You're going to suffer material and personnel losses, and your power and influence will recede. You're not going to succeed. You're not going to grow. You're not going to spread your economic model to more places. In the real world, capitalism delivers and socialism withers. Thanks for watching. Peace out.